Hello and welcome to the Chaddy Enders, episode 6. Flying by these now. I'm David Broadbent, and every week I am joined by someone that has a connection with Oldham Athletic Football Club. It might be a former player or a manager or a member of staff or a journalist or, could quite well be anyone. In a couple of weeks we've got Chaddy the Owl coming up, who has some fascinating insights into the club. A big thank you to our sponsors, to AC Tyres, Wayne and the team down on Cross Street. They are open. They are essential, of course. Should you need anything for your car, any tyre needs or anything like that, then please do give Wayne a message. They are on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram at AC Tyres. Lifelong Latics fan as well. Tell me you're a Latics fan. Also to NFL Weekends, to James and the team at NFL Weekends, who perhaps now after this week's announcements, maybe looking with half an eye on running some trips out to the States later on this year for some fantastic weekends away to watch some NFL games, but to have a fantastic weekend-long party in some great American cities. That's at NFL Weekends on Instagram, on Facebook, and on Twitter. Also to Eden Creative, Rick and his team in Royton. Eden Creative, fantastic for websites, for design, anything like that. In fact, if you're watching this rather than listening to it, you'll see the sign over my shoulder. They did that, and also the branding around the framework. Rick, of course, also a long-time Latics fan. So thank you very much to our sponsors. Today's guest is not a player. He's definitely not a footballer, actually. He spent 19 years with the club. He joined in the finance department. He went on under the dark days following Chris Moore to be co-owner of the club alongside Sean Jarvis. He then went on to be chief exec at Latics before leaving after 19 years at the club. This is a fun one for me because he was also my boss, not once but twice, actually. So I'm looking forward to turning the tables and giving him a bit of a grilling. So it's my absolute pleasure to welcome to the Chaddy Enders, Neil Joy. Neil, thank you very much for taking the time to join us this week. First of all, with COVID and everything, how are you? What are you up to these days and how are you doing?
Well, I think I'm very well in the circumstances. I mean, it's been very difficult for everybody, obviously, the last 12 months with the COVID situation. But fortunately, I've got a role that I'm enjoying with a drinks company operating out of Bury. And it's going well. Family's all well. Everybody's healthy and it's all good.
Excellent. So kind of did some research looking back at your time at the club and, 19 years. So I kind of almost don't know where to start. So I think we'll start at the beginning. How did you end up at the club? You went obviously into the finance side of things first. Do you remember how that came about and like your interview process and who it was that appointed you?
I'm sure the older fans will remember the travel agents operated at the club shop, Latics Travel. I worked for a firm of accountants and we did the books for the travel agents. And I think it was about the time Alan Hardy had just taken over as chief executive and he was looking for an accountant, a bookkeeper accountant to come in. He knew me from doing the travel agent's accounts and he said, do you fancy it? And I said, absolutely. And I had an interview with Mr. Stott. And it was from there, really. It all done very quickly. All done very quickly.
Oh, good. So we mentioned there already Alan Hardy. A number of characters that we'll come across over the course of this interview. Alan was certainly a character as well during his time at the club.
I think there've been loads of characters over the years. Obviously, the memorable ones, I suppose, are more the players than the admin staff, if you like. I mean, Alan was a great mentor. He loved the club, worked very hard for the club, and obviously spent a long time at the club. And I learned quite a lot of him. But the characters were mostly on the playing side. I mean, when I joined, there was players like Sean Garnett, Darren Sheridan, Lee Duxbury knocking around. And those sort of characters are not in the game anymore. I mean, they're just wonderful people, great lads to have around the place. And they just made the club feel like a real community home club. Just fun to be around at that time, even though we were struggling, on the pitch. It was still a great fun place to start. One of the reasons that I knew I'd made the right call as soon as I joined the club.
And so you've not been at the club that long, probably. You've been at the club a couple of years by that point, and new chairman comes in. Chris Moore arrives at the club, and from your sort of job in the accounting department, he was throwing money at players. You've probably never seen that sort of money at Oldham before.
Not before or since, I don't think. Yeah, I mean, he was obviously a big character. And actually, to be fair, looking back, in terms of the ownership, one of the owners who you actually knew where you stood with him. I mean, he was a proper businessman. He had great advisors. I mean, Bob Telfer, he brought along with him at the start. Sadly, Bob died pretty quickly into his tenure, and I think it was a big loss to Chris Moore. But you knew where you stood with Moore. I mean, he had money, but it was all tied up in shares in his Torex business, and we were signing players, lots of players on reasonably large contracts, with the intention of getting promoted out of the division. And really, that season when he and Dowry were in charge, we should have gone up. It was a tough division. I think Crewe, QPR, Wigan were all involved, and we missed out in the playoffs, only just. And I think that side should have gone up. If Moore had stuck around and we'd have invested a little bit more in the squad with Dowry as manager, I'm sure we would have done the next season.
Was there a point for you during that season, being in the finance department, where you looked at it and thought, we could be in a bit of trouble here? I
think we've always been in trouble, Roddy. Ever since I joined, we had very little resources, and it's always been a problem at the club, having the cash, finding the cash. Where's the next cash coming from? Where's the wages going to come? I don't think it's any different nowadays, to be honest. I think we're all aware of that. It's difficult, but I think with Moore, he had a plan, and that plan was to get promoted 2 or 3 seasons. I mean, the share crash affected his share price, and I think that just meant that he couldn't afford to put any more money in. And he said, "I'm not putting another penny in," and he never did. He was true to his word. It made it very difficult, obviously, and there was a few casualties along the way, and then we had that ridiculously difficult summer that I think Sean alluded to in his podcast the other week. And it was very difficult times, but we all pulled together and came through, and the club survived for one reason or other. I'd like to think I played a bit of a role in that, and that was the key thing for me, just making sure that the club survived, given the amount of money that was owed. It wouldn't survive nowadays under the same circumstances.
You mentioned Sean, of course. Sean did one a podcast a few weeks ago, and you became co-owner of the club for a short time with Sean. 2 very different characters. I guess you probably balanced each other out. I would think it's probably fair to say.
I think that's pretty true. I think it was really tough. I mean, I can remember when we bought it, and 50p was about all I had. So there was no way and Sean as well. There's no way personally we had any money or resource to put into it. We just had some time. And trying to get a consortium together and people around the table. There were always expressions of interest, and 1 or 2 people did say, you've definitely got our support, you've definitely got some money. But it was never, to be brutally honest, it was never going to be enough. The secret was to make sure that the key was to make sure that the club survived. And when we took it over, I think there was, again, Sean alluded to the Norwegian businessman who came in and bought the club. And I remember being at the Midland Hotel when Moore actually sold it over to it. And we were there, shaking our heads, thinking, we don't believe this is actually happening. It doesn't feel right. We were right. We'd been told. I think the fans had got the bus together on the day, and we're driving down to Chris Moore's offices in Torex in Oxfordshire, and then we got a phone call from David Briley saying, "Pull the coach back. I've got a deal. The deal's being done. Get yourselves down to the Midland Hotel." And to be fair, at that time, we just had to say, well, it's the only deal on the table at the moment, so we've got to go with it. And then the Norwegian businessman couldn't pay his drinks bill, disappeared, and we were back to square one. But I think that took the wind out of the sails a little bit. A few days later, we decided we had to take it over. We were the only game in town, so we bought it. And within 2 or 3 days, you just knew that the situation wasn't going to be a successful takeover. I had the manager wanting to know what we were doing for the squad for the season, revenue and customs in the lobby in the office wanting with a winding up petition, and we owed hundreds of thousands of pounds. So I made sure we had a friendly administrator on side, went to the High Court in Leeds, and stood there and appealed to the judge's better nature to grant an administration order to protect the club. He granted it, and then we set about trying to find new owners.
Looking back at it now, how close do you think the club came to actually going under?
I think it's been a couple of times. In my time at the club. That was the first one. The second time, which we may come to later, which was when Corney was in charge, and we drew Liverpool in the FA Cup, which is obviously a big story. But that one, we were minutes away from going bust. There's no reason, if we hadn't got a friendly judge and done the research and made sure that the administrator was in place, looking at the figures that we put together and that the professionals had put together for us, there was no way that a right-minded judge who wasn't a football fan would have granted the administration order, and I think we'd have gone bust. So yeah, we were seconds from administration, seconds from liquidation. Sorry.
So then the season starts, and you and Sean are sort of steering us through administration. Talk us through the arrival of Simon Corney, Simon Blitz, and Danny Gazal, and how that sort of came about.
Well, I think first of all, and I think a lot of people need to probably deserve credit who weren't given credit at the time. The staff that were around at the time stuck with it. Most of them stayed on. One or two left because they felt that there was no future at the club for them. But the majority of the staff stayed with it. And you got a sense that if we could find somebody, there was an opportunity to do something. If we could keep it going, the manager Ian was hard work. He was a good manager, a great man manager, probably the best man manager that I worked with at the club. But he was hard work. He wanted more. He wanted the best, which is highly understandable. But one thing we did have at that time, we had a couple of really good players. Paul Murray, who was superb that season. It always reminds me of the fact that he was the one that saved the club, and he's not far off because that season he was exceptional. John Sheridan, of course, and it just enabled us to sort of like buy some time. So when Simon Blitz and Danny Gazal came forward and put some money in to steer us through that period between August and January, the end of January when they took over, they had to pay for that administration process. So they had to pay all the wages, make sure the club ran, and it was a long process, longer than you would probably get nowadays. Although some of these administrations seem to go on forever, in those days it was a different beast really, and it took a while for everything to come round and for them to get the shares and get it all transferred and satisfy the administrators and the Football League, of course, that they were capable of taking it forward. And it looked like from then on everything was going to be rosy. What did we have for that Celebration Sunday game? 13,500. I remember season ticket holders queuing up outside. Irate season ticket holders banging on the windows at the front. I had every sympathy for them, and we had to walk them through the lounge to get them in, and everyone was packed in like sardines. And it was a great day. And obviously, we put it 6-0 we won, and against Grimsby, and it was a great day. And you just felt that that was the first time I felt in my time there that we had a real opportunity to do something big.
And sort of not long after, I suppose, and around that sort of time, we managed to go on a bit of a cup run and knock Manchester City out as well. Now, I don't know if Oldham fans will necessarily know this, and I'm not sure how much you are anymore, but when you arrived, you were a City fan, so...
absolutely. I've been a season ticket holder for many years. I had to give it up when I joined Latics. And I think that game that you're referring to when Scott Vernon scored the winner, that was the only game I can ever remember where I actually wanted City to lose. I think even before then, whenever Oldham have played City, deep down I've always wanted City to win. They were always my team at the end of the day, and that doesn't change. But all my family are Oldham Athletic season ticket holders. My son's absolutely mad on them. I can't. He won't change his mind. He hates it. It drives him mad. But at the end of the day, it's in his blood, if you like. His mum's a season ticket holder, former season ticket holder. His uncle's a season ticket holder. His granddad's a season ticket holder. His cousin's a season ticket holder. It's in the family, so that's what it's like. Once you're an Oldham fan, you're always an Oldham fan. But for me, it was always a little different.
And so the new three owners come in, and we start to see a bit of an uplift on the pitch as well. We got to the playoffs a couple of years later. So from your point, can you sort of see a club that's in progress, if you like?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there's two things really. The first thing, that they were determined to get a new stadium for the club. Blitz and Gazal knew that was the key. Unlocking the facilities and generating some extra revenue off the field was going to be the key to the long-term future of the club. And I think the failure of the Failsworth project, if you like to call it that, it certainly put a stop to Simon Blitz's enjoyment of running the club, and was the beginning of the end for him. But they saw that as absolutely the key to generating the revenue and so disappointing when that didn't happen for them, because they put a lot of time and effort into it. They also invested quite heavily on the pitch. You know me, my background and what I think that if you get it right off the pitch, you can then concentrate on getting it right on the pitch. That was always sort of like my mantra. And you know, on the pitch, never really quite hit the heights. I mean, we got to the playoffs under Shez in the semi-final, but we never really looked like we were going to beat Blackpool over the two legs. So we were still a little bit off in terms of on the field, and yet they'd invested heavily and spent a lot of money on players and making sure that we could put a challenge in. We never really struggled. It was always looked like at some point, if we could keep the momentum and keep things going, keep things ticking over, that at some point we would challenge for promotion properly. But I think that the loss of the facility at Failsworth really did blitz in the end, and I think that was the beginning of the end for him.
And on the pitch at that sort of time, we talk about some characters, the likes of Richie Wellens and Paul Warren and players like that. So again, people that sort of lively around the area.
Every club has lively, players who are, you know what footballers are like. We dealt with them. We've both dealt with them long enough in our careers. Some of them can be quite lively and difficult to deal with. Others can give you no trouble at all. The most important thing is what they're like when they cross the white line. At the end of the day, football, for me, is about two things. It's about the fans, but most importantly, it's about the players. If you've got the players, you can achieve something. If you've got poor players, you ain't going nowhere. And for me, it was always good whenever we got a player who was good quality, like Richie Wellens, John Sheridan, those type of players. Always loved those players. But you've had to supplement with players who were less characters, but of similar quality. Players like David Ayres, who was probably, looking back, my favourite player at the club when he came in, and we weren't the best team. Let's be honest. When him and Carsey came in, we weren't the best team under Andy Ritchie. Had a lot of young players, local players, Yorkshire lads, Oldham boys, Manchester lads. We weren't a great side, but one thing you did get was effort and commitment, and those type of players, for me, are worth the weight in gold. You can build a team around those players because you're going to get 7 out of 10 every week from them, and we always did. And somebody like Ayres, he just a joy to have around the place. Those type of players, and players who used to come in and have a chat, but not be loud and raucous with it, but just come in and say hello in the office with the staff. People like Ruben Hazel, who are one of the nicest people you could ever wish to meet. And just a pleasure to be around, and you actually felt that you were, you could watch them on a Saturday afternoon and you were with them. Some of the other players who maybe were a bit more hard to handle, more difficult, who you thought were only using Oldham as a stepping stone, it is more difficult to get behind them when you're not just a fan, when you're working in the club in that environment. If you're a fan and a player does something magnificent, you can get behind him. When behind the scenes is a bit of a more difficult character, if you like, it is more difficult to get behind. But we've had all sorts of characters over the years, as you know.
And I guess the next sort of chronology, the next sort of significant moment would be knocking down the stand, which probably couldn't have come at a worse time. I think it was about 2 weeks before the global financial crisis.
Yeah.
And again, just a horrible piece of timing for the owners.
Well, if you look back at all the owners and all the managers, it just seems like Oldham is the unluckiest club in the world. You look at the number of players that have gone on to play to bigger and better things, having played at Oldham, and you think he's never going to make it. We were talking about James Tarkowski before, and I don't think anybody, seriously, if you were looking back, who watched James when he was growing up and playing for Oldham, ever thought he would become an England international. He had something about him, but people playing for Oldham didn't tend to become England internationals. There were a couple of lads on loan who you may have thought would go on and progress, but the players you thought always seemed to play for other clubs, and yet looking back, we had some real quality, but we had some proper players. Neil Erd, we watched Neil Erd last night, still playing for Barrow now. Players like that who, when they played for Oldham, you never thought they were going to be Premier League players, but they became Premier League players, and I think we probably underestimated some of the talent that we actually had at the time. I don't know what the reason for that is, but going back to the stand, it's just disappointing that something seemed to happen. I mean, we had our fair share of luck as well. Don't get me wrong. I mean, cup draws mostly, and you've got to get in the hat for them in the first. But when you're drawn out of the hat, it's pure luck. You know, you don't know who you're going to get. That's one of the beauties of the FA Cup, the League Cup, and stuff like that. But you know, just timing wise, you're right. And again, the nail in the coffin, really. And although we didn't need a full four-sided ground in terms of the fans that we were bringing into the club, you know, those big cup days. If you look back on them, the Liverpools and the Evertons, just imagine if we'd have had four stands full, you know, what the atmosphere would have been like there. It was so warm, of course. But, yeah.
Do you think that perhaps played a part in attracting players, that they'd rock up to Boundary Park and they'd see sort of three stands, and especially if you're trying to sign a player in January and it's absolutely freezing and the wind's flipping around you? Do you think that ever played a part in attracting players?
I'm sure it did. I'm sure it does at all clubs. I mean, I can only go off the example I can got from my second club, which was Fylde. I mean, there we have all the facilities you could shake a stick at. I mean, no better facilities in non-league, better facilities than the majority of, you know, League Two and League One clubs. And if you got a player there and showed him the facilities, you were halfway to signing him before you'd even discussed money or what the manager was like or anything like that. At Oldham, you had to sell it as being a community, a place where you can, you sort of like, it's almost like starting again for some players. And the number of players who come in and didn't fancy it. I mean, there were all stories of people like, you know, Gary Lineker turning up playing for Tottenham in an FA Cup. I'm not playing on that. You know, that sort of stuff. And they were right. It was hard. You have to be a certain type of player, which is why I go back to the fact that I always like my players to have that spirit and that desire and the determination to, you know that when they put a shirt on, it didn't matter what the facilities were like, they were giving 100% for the cause every week. And a lot of players, particularly the low knees that came in, some of them, I won't name them because you'll know who they are as well as I do. Most of the fans will know who they were, come from, you know, your Manchester Cities and your Manchester Uniteds. And they got all the ability in the world, but just didn't turn up because they couldn't handle where they were playing and the facilities, the cold weather, the fact that the showers might not work every now and again. It was difficult. You had to have a certain type of character to succeed.
And obviously, as a club, you see it in the press all the time that you get linked with loads of players, particularly in summer. Who were the ones that got away? Who were the ones that we nearly signed? I mean, you see hundreds of names every summer. Who were the ones that we nearly signed under when you were sort of there at the club that we didn't get in the end?
Do you know what? I don't think that there are that many who you could actually say, you know, we nearly signed. Look, we tried and signed thousands of players. You know, and you make initial inquiries, and usually the money was, you know, what we were offering wasn't sufficient. There were players like, you know, Ian Moore was one in particular who you'll be well aware of who we wanted to sign. There are a couple of other lads, a couple of players who we thought we'd already signed. They'd come to sign the contracts and didn't turn up. You know, there was a few, but not too many really. You know, I remember Gordon doing the Patrick Berger story. That was quite funny. God bless him. And it was, you know, tongue in cheek, but generally, if we wanted to sign a player, or the manager wanted to sign a player, he'd already done his homework on him and knew he would come. Decent managers know that they're going to come anyway, so you know, there weren't many who we go, could we get him? Could we get them? No, there was one or two who may have slipped through the net, but I don't think we missed out particularly on anybody who would have made a big difference to what we were doing anyway. I don't think it was that type of club. You know, I think, you know, if a manager wanted to sign a player, we generally tried to get him, and we generally did, because most managers don't come to you unless they think that they're going to get that player signed at the end of the day.
And in your journey at the club, the next step for you was Alan Hardy retiring and you becoming chief exec. How did that come about for you?
Well, of course, Alan was very poorly for a long period and was away for a while. And I think, to be honest, he'd probably come to the end of the road. Again, you're looking at around the stand and Simon Blitz, and it probably, I think he was advised, and he'd tell you better himself, I think he was advised that, you know, work wasn't for him anymore. He had to look after himself. and given the length of service he'd done to the club, I don't think anybody could begrudge him, leaving when he wanted to. So he left, and I think we played Liverpool away, and it was winter. I remember it was cold winter, so we had no chief executive. There was me. We had no chief executive. A bookkeeper, Christine Dowd, she'd sadly passed away as well. No club secretary, obviously. So we were basically rolling our sleeves up and trying to get through as best we could that difficult period. We lost to Liverpool. I think that was the 5-1 game at Anfield where we scored first, and then they buried us. But I remember working that winter. It was difficult, but again, as I've always done, always put the club, or tried to put the club first. Some people may disagree, but I always felt that it was the club first for me, and I just rolled my sleeves up and I said, well, do I fancy it? I spoke to Alan Hardy. I wasn't sure about the ownership, the regime, whether it really suited me, what I wanted to try and do at the club, whether I'd be able to get my way. It turned out that really you didn't really get your way anyway. You could have a say, but at the end of the day, unless you're the owner, it is just a say. Sometimes it's listened to, sometimes it's not, and you have to suck it up and get on with it. But I think they interviewed 3 or 4 people, some quite decent people, and sort of like not last minute, but pretty close to the end, I just went up to Simon Corney and I said, "What about me?" And he said, "Okay." So I had an interview, and I think because they trusted me, because I knew it, and because probably I was a little bit cheaper than the others, I got the job.
And how different was it for you? So to step up from looking after all the finance to being the chief executive, how much of a change was that in your day-to-day routine?
Well, it's a big change. I mean, the trouble is it changes so quickly. It's like 1 minute you're not, the next minute you are, that you don't really have time to think about it. And probably some people would say until it's too late. But when I actually look back, it was a big change. I actually suddenly all of a sudden felt personally responsible for everything that happened. So I think the first game, I think there was a little bit of a lull, and we were in the winter period. The FA Cup would have been on. We were in a bit of a lull. The first game was on a Monday night. It was the Johnson's Paint Trophy semi-final, second leg against Chesterfield, when I think we had about 45 shots on target.
Oh, the name Tommy Lee still strikes shivers
down my spine. In the last minute. And again, you go back to that being a lucky club. I don't think it's changed. So it's not me, because it's not changed since I left. But you go back to that being a lucky club. But again, that moment, that one game, could have changed the course of the history of the club. And that was the first game. And I remember being so down about it afterwards, because everyone was flat, and suddenly I'm now in charge, and I've got to take this beast of a club that it wasn't dysfunctional. I mean, but it was hard to run. Over the next couple of years, there were a lot of politics off the field, a lot of politics that you had to negotiate and get through. It wasn't easy. The job isn't easy when you turn up every morning and there's 5 or 6 people wanting your attention and wanting a word, or ringing you late at night. It isn't easy, and it's not easy because you haven't got the resource. We have never had any resource. And I'm not just talking in terms of money, but I'm talking in terms of quality of not staff with the heart and the desire to do well. But we have no human resources, no legal, nothing you would normally, if you were running a professional organisation, be able to turn to if you needed a little bit of professional advice. That you had to go out and find it, and there was always a problem, always problems. It was never any different, and it never really changed during my whole tenure, really, or the whole 3.5, 4 years, however long it was.
Well, at that point, you talk about quality of staff. At that point, I joined the club. So,
that's right. Yeah.
So yeah, there you go. It was just
I think you were my first choice. On both occasions.
I think you took over that sort of the end of January, and I pitched up in the March. First week in March, I started at the club. That was great for me because you say your first game was losing against Chesterfield. My first game was the game we came from 2 down to win at Bramall Lane. Yes,
well, I mean that was a fantastic. I mean, I've got some great memories of Bramall Lane because we tended to do really well there. I think we got a last-minute equaliser one season, and then obviously Cucci's penalty, and it was just a really good day for the fans. And again, there seemed to be so few of them, but they were all away games. Those away days that you really sort of like, you saw the fans and what it meant to them. You know, if you've got 3,000 Oldham fans in the ground, all behind the goal, beating the so-called bigger club was always, you know, or the local derbies were always games that stick in the memory. That one was a special one, yeah. So a good start for you. I think you always did well on your debut, anyway.
Yeah, it was all right. Yeah, yeah, I'm not done bad going over that. Yeah, quite. When I came to join you at Fylde, my first game was beating Boston 9-2. So,
yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, we beat a lot of teams. We beat a lot of teams very heavily that season. But I think we also lost. Didn't we lose at Tamworth the following week, which 1-0? I think it was probably our only defeat in about 30 games till about February before that. But
so at Oldham at that time, Paul Dickoff's manager, and the season after we go on an FA Cup run, which for reasons, sort of financial reasons off the pitch, as vital as it was to the players, and we interviewed James Tarkowski, who talks about the Everton game being one that sort of ignited his career, and we all know what the FA Cup run did for Matt Smith. But off the pitch, certainly in the earlier rounds, it became very clear that it was very important to get through those rounds.
I think, I mean, Paul Dickoff was manager. Paul's a fantastic guy, a lovely guy, and I just wish, again, looking back, that he'd had an assistant or a number two who was more senior. Greatly from that type of individual, helping him out. He did well at Doncaster, Paul. He did okay. It's a funny story, actually. There aren't many funny stories, but my first away trip as chief exec was MK Dons. Not a happy hunting ground for Oldham supporters over the years, and there's another one that I'll come to in a bit, which is the subject we might touch on around about the following winter. But we got on the coach, and the coach company's owner's son was driving the coach. He wasn't our regular driver, and we were scheduled to pick Mr. Dickoff up at Norton Keynes services, and the coach driver told him where to go, so we're all sat there waiting. We drove straight past Norton Keynes services and Mr. Dickoff waiting for us to collect him. But it was my first away game. This isn't going to end well, and so Paul had to get back in the car, drive down to the next services and pick us up. And when we got to the ground, we all got off the coach, laughing to be fair about it. And we walked round, and we heard this incredible crunch from round the side of the ground, and the coach driver had skimmed the whole side off the coach. This, £45,000 worth of damage to this coach. This isn't going well. So we had to run around trying to organise a new coach. It was broken. It couldn't work. It couldn't move. So while the players were warming up and the first half was going on, I'm ringing round trying to get a new coach ready to bring us back home. I get up back to the seat, and sure enough, I think we got dropped 5-0. And it wasn't a great day, and that was my first away trip as CEO. So we'd had the Chesterfield one apiece, and then we had the 5-0 defeat. It's not going well. This it did get a little bit better, not a lot, but it did get a little bit better. But we survived that season, and like you say, we moved into the next season. And those first two rounds in the FA Cup, Kidderminster, I think, was the first game. Yeah. And Crofty scored one of his few goals for the club. And we won there, and then we beat Doncaster, another regular team in the cup. We beat them, and we drew Nottingham Forest away first week in January in the third round, and the club was in real financial difficulty. Blitz had disappeared. Simon Corney, bless him, he worked hard. His heart was in the right place. Always was. He was very good at picking a player, understanding players, and he enjoyed that side of the business. The actual business side of the business was less his bag, So left us to get on with that really, which we did. But money-wise, we were struggling. We had a lot of very talented players. Baxter, Simpson, Dean Furman, good players. It was a good side. We always had good sides. If you think back, we have had good sides over the years. It just seemed to underachieve for whatever reason that is, in my opinion. But that team, we played Nottingham Forest, and we were really struggling. And I think that was the time. I thought we were going to go under. I don't know what would have happened. I think Simon Blitz would have had to have done something, but he wasn't showing any interest anymore. It was basically up to Simon Corney to get us through. And we played Forest, and they played us off the park in the first half. And we came into the boardroom at half time, and Simon was ashen-faced. He knew what the implications of defeat were. He knew what the implications were. Absolutely no doubt about it. And we sat there. And that second half, I don't know where it came from. I've no idea. To this day, the players will tell you, they might tell you that there was some magic spark at half time. It just seemed, but from the moment the second half started, there was never any doubt of the result. Latics were going to win. And it was my favourite, it was definitely my favourite game because of the implications. And we scored some great goals. They played some great football. The fans suddenly became enthused and energised because they realised that this is the FA Cup. We're going to be in the fourth round of the FA Cup. And we reached the fourth round before. We lost to Huddersfield once, and we reached the fourth round before, but it seemed to be a bit different. And I came out of the ground, it was dark afterwards, and Corney looked at me and he showed us something. Nobody will ever know what that victory means. Only me and you will ever know. Well, no, everybody knows. But or everybody the 10 people that are listening to the podcast. Yeah?
I was going to say you might have been you and Simon might have been good bosses, and I very much enjoyed my time working at Oldham under you both. But believe me when I say that we were all well aware of what that game was.
It was such a difficult. It was so difficult, and the relief. We were in the boardroom, and they've got the 2 European cups on the wall. The replicas on the wall. It's a fantastic place, and that's one of the things that I'll be ever grateful for. I got to visit some fantastic places. The boardrooms at Liverpool, Everton, Forest, places where you can't get into on a match day. Money can't buy those. It was brilliant for me. I'm forever grateful for that. But that game was the big game. And then, of course, we drew Liverpool. And, of course, in the league, we were struggling. We couldn't buy a point in the league. I think we ended up losing 9 of 11 or 9 of 10 before Paul was sacked. But in the cup, there was just some magic in the air. So obviously we got the Liverpool draw, and the build up to that game with the TV and everything was something had not experienced before as CEO. It's hard work. Everybody pulled together. The fans, the club, the staff, everybody just pulled together, knowing that this was going to be a big day. It was on a Sunday, live, BBC. This is the big game of the round, or ITV. I can't remember whether it was BBC or ITV at that time, but it was the big game of the round. And of course, all in the week to the build-up, the forecast was for snow, and we didn't put the pitch cover down or anything like that. We just had our pitch covers on, and we got there. I got there. I was first there on the Saturday morning, and we put an appeal out for snow clearers on the Friday. And I put the appeal out on Friday. I turned up in my car, managed to park up, don't know how, managed to get there, managed to park up. And there was one lad with a spade and me, and there's probably a good foot of snow all around the ground. And I said, how on earth are we going to get this game on? And within 6 hours, the whole place had been cleared. And it was all down to the fans. They came down, and the ground staff Lee Williams and his team put on a great effort. We got tractors in, we cleared everything, and you just felt that all that effort cannot be for nothing. And we went home. I went home that night and shed a little tear actually. That the work we put in, that we knew that game was going to go ahead. Again, it didn't look like the game was going ahead, and the implications of the game not going ahead could be anything, because the TV might have pulled the plug. You lose your $250,000 or whatever it was at the time for the TV money. We knew how much that game was worth to us, and potentially how much it could have been worth to us. And then we came in on the Sunday, and everything just went normal. It started raining, so all the hard work that we'd done the previous day, we might not have had to do it anyway. So there was a sort of like, it's the only time I ever felt there was something written in the stars. And I remember the team the teams came out and Brad Jones were in goal, and you said, "Yeah, Brad Jones is in goal. We can win this." And I think you knew we could win it, and I knew we could win it. And they had Carragher and Gerrard on the bench, so they had plenty in reserve if things didn't go well. But again, from somewhere, the players who couldn't buy a win in the league suddenly, from nowhere, put in a performance that that the club should be forever grateful for. It was just a phenomenal afternoon. And you watch the game again now, and you see the goals, and of course Matt Smith's too, and you forget that Yusuf Changamar, who was again another lovely lad, but the crossing for the first goal got injured by Raheem Sterling. Everything just fell into place. Carl Winchester with a left foot cross, and Reece Wabara with a back post, third goal. Those sort of things just very rarely happen, and it was just a phenomenal day. But behind the scenes, we knew that we were struggling in the league. Paul was going, he was going, and we had the draw straight afterwards, and we drew Everton at home. And I think the decision had already been made that Paul was going to go. It was just very difficult to let him go before the Liverpool game. But I think we played Walsall and lost 3-1, got an absolute tonking off Walsall. And that was Paul's last game. Very sad day for me. Probably one of the saddest I've had, because obviously being a City fan originally, Paul is a City legend, so it was very difficult. But Paul, with good grace, accepted it all. He was obviously very disappointed, but I think he understood. At the end of the day, results drive managerial careers, and the results weren't good enough, even though we were doing well in the cup. And we had the Everton game. And that last minute equaliser that I think probably Matt Smith's not got a picture of it on his wall somewhere, and he should have. Just unbelievable stories for that group of players within that team. The people that roll the sleeves up, like James Weslowski, proper 100%ers who forced the issue, and we earned more money out of that Everton game than any other game in the club's history, and it saved the club. You can argue, what did you do with the money? But again, that money had already been spent. Really, it's not. You don't suddenly generate £1 million and you think, right, what can we do? Where can we invest this? In a club like Oldham, where the ground needs replacing, and all the infrastructure needs replacing, that money is quickly spent. So it's more important that if there are other areas that need it spending on, that they get it spent on. And that was that cup run. And it was great to be part of it. But I think the credit is something that I felt the fans deserved, because the fans were the ones that got that game on, shifting that snow. And I'm not talking about the fans that come from far and wide, supporters like that. I'm talking about the local ones who came in and actually put a shift in to make sure that game comes on. And they're still out there. They still do the same thing now for the club I'm sure.
You mentioned there Paul Dickoff leaving. So Lee Johnson then joined. Sonny Phillips-Kirk has the Everton games, and then Lee Johnson comes in. As CEO, were you involved in that decision, or was that a Simon Corney choice? Because at the time, Lee Johnson, I remember seeing Lee come into a game before he was appointed, seeing him in the lounge before the game, and just assuming we were looking at him as a player.
Yeah, I can understand why you would think that. Actually, I think he called Sam. He literally turned up at the front door of the club, and Simon was in. He says, "Come in, I want you to meet this chap." And we sat there, and he did a presentation, and you say you're blown away. It was different. If there's one manager who you would want, who I would, if I had to choose one manager out of all those, however many that were there throughout my whole time at Oldham, Lee would be the one, and still would be now. He just put a presentation on it. He showed us a presentation on Corey Smith, and it wasn't just a presentation. It was an in-depth profile of a player who he may or may not be able to, persuade to come to Oldham Athletic. And he said, "I'll give you this one for free. So even if you don't give me the job, Corey Smith. I know he's available. Norwich will let him come out, and he'll be a fantastic signing for you. But I just think that Simon talked to people like that. They talked his language. He could have a conversation. They could get the Subbuteo table out, have a game, but talk tactics at the same time. So he was engaged. And the thing with Simon Corney is if he was engaged and interested, things happened. It's when he disengaged and wasn't interested that the problems really started for me. And Lee, the type of personality that made you sit up and take notice. It was a gamble, but I think it was the right gamble at the right time. And to me, probably, it's such a shame that he left when he did. There were 2 or 3 things that went on during his tenure that, again, we'll probably come to shortly. But I think from that day one, Simon and myself sat there with him, and then he said, we went to the rest of the board and said, we think we found somebody. I think I found somebody. And I think everybody was impressed. There might have been 1 or 2 doubts about the fact that he had no experience, but I think just his knowledge and the fact that he'd wanted to be a manager virtually since the day he was born. Clearly a decent coach, clearly engaged. He'd done work behind the scenes for years, getting himself to that stage. He'd moved his whole family from down south to the Crewe area so he could be central, so he could be prepared. He was a manager in waiting, and he just wanted an opportunity. And I'm sure he's grateful that he got it at Oldham.
Quite. So off the pitch, when Lee was there, one of the things we did that was quite controversial at the time was renaming the stadium. That wasn't universally popular at the time, but again, it kind of at the time provided some money to go towards the building of the stand.
Well, you know what? I'm a traditionalist. I think most football fans are. It's played on grass, 11 aside. Most football, you like a match programme to read while you're waiting for your game. You get your pie and your pint. That's how I grew up, supporting football and being involved in football. I think most people are traditionalists. But at the end of the day, in order to compete, you need to generate revenue off the field. And we haven't got a backer or an owner who was prepared to put millions of pounds in, never mind. I say hundreds of thousands in, never mind the millions that you actually probably do need to ensure you compete. If you've not got the infrastructure, Boundary Park's a great place, full of history, full of tradition, but it's just not fit for purpose. It just isn't. It just doesn't do what it needs to do in order for the club to succeed. And the Sports Direct deal was an interesting one, very interesting one. The only £1 million sponsorship deal in the club's history, I think, it's on your CV, isn't it?
Top line, that, yeah.
Yeah, top line. And again, we had some interesting times with Sports Direct after you'd gone, when things weren't going as well and the stand wasn't being built and they didn't get the shop that they wanted within there and they wanted the gym. But again, the revenue that it brought, helped us significantly to try and make sure that the team we could put out was competitive, and it was. For the time that Lee was there, we were competitive. I think we were 2 or 3 short, and probably maybe non-short if Lee had stayed, 2 or 3 short from a real challenge, and not only a real challenge in League One, but a succeeding, if you say success in the Championship, survival in the Championship for 2 or 3 years with the team that we have. There was definitely shoots there that suggested that we could do that. The players that Lee brought in on loan, for instance, all enhanced the team. He was able to pick a player like Bobby Reid, people like that. You might think, well, he didn't play very much for Oldham, but you could tell Lee knew what he was talking about. So everyone was invested in him. And we had Daniel Johnson, these type of players, players who are successful Championship footballers. And that's what, if you're going to succeed at League One, you need Championship footballers. You need Championship footballers that people may not be aware of. And then you're going to succeed. And you'll be ready then to succeed in the Championship. And I think if Lee had stayed, another year, 2, we would have succeeded. But again, it's very difficult. A young, hungry manager, if he gets an offer from somewhere else, he's going to consider it. He's got his own career and future to think about. He's forever grateful to Oldham, and I'm sure Oldham fans might not shout his name from the rooftops because he left. But at the end of the day, you can't blame him. While he was at the club, he put his heart and soul into it. To be fair, like every manager did, and I mean every manager. I don't think there were any manager who didn't put their heart and soul into Oldham Athletic while they were there. But Lee left. Yeah, I think there's difficult times before Lee left, but he coped with them as well. He's a good manager, and he will have every success at Sunderland. There's no doubt about it.
You mentioned their difficult times. That has to lead me to probably the thing I put out that you were coming on the podcast, and probably the thing that I received the most questions about to put to you. Ched Evans, a player that ultimately we didn't sign, that created a lot of media attention around the club. Now, I wasn't involved. I'd left the club a couple of months earlier and would just see him I knew on the just on news every day, like you having to go out and speak to 30 or 40 journalists at the front door with the latest on what was happening with Ched Evans. That must have been a very difficult period for you.
I think I referred earlier on to the lack of resource at the club, and I think the Ched Evans situation and the whole issue around him trying to sign Ched it highlighted to me the lack of resource at the club. We had no one to turn to deal with press. Yeah, your local press. You could deal with your local press if you had to. That was pretty straightforward. But the national press, and not just the national press, but the front page, not the back page. We had nobody I could pick the phone up to. Anybody could pick up the phone to just say, any chance of some help here? How do we deal with this? The first I knew that we were interested in signing Ched Evans was in the November. I think we were doing well in the league, doing reasonably well in the league. But one thing we did lack, I think, was a 20-goal striker. Obviously, they're worth the weight in gold, if you can find one. It is the holy grail for lower league clubs. And there was talk that we were interested in signing Ched. I think the board, not Simon, one or two of the other board members were having discussions around the potential. Is it a possibility? Is it feasible? What does everybody think? That sort of conversation, nothing concrete, just a conversation. And I think at the time, unbeknownst to myself and maybe one or two others, discussions were being had behind the scenes. And I think we played Rochdale away. That's no, we did. We played Rochdale away. We played really well. We won 3-0. And I think we've moved up to about 7th in the table or something like that, within the playoff zone anyway. And it was in November. And the talk was after that game that we didn't need to go down that road. And it died off for a little bit. And unfortunately, and again, it's sort of like, it's not luck. This isn't luck. It's just that the club didn't come out of it well, obviously, PR-wise, with the fans. And I'm not talking about nationally or anything like that, or the whole situation around Ched. I'm talking about the goodwill and the trust that Simon and the club had with the supporters at the time. Whether we would have signed Ched or not, that was damaging, and probably fatally so for Simon in many ways. But we lost Yeovil, I think. Lee's old club, 4-1 at home. We went to MK Dons and got absolutely murdered again, 7-0. Horrific performance just before Christmas.
I think I did better in goal that day.
Oh, and then it was awful. And these players, again, they were good players, and they were taken apart by an MK Dons side who played nice football, but they weren't brilliant. They weren't world beaters. They just played a lot better than us on the day, and we just folded. And then we played Crewe on Boxing Day and lost 2-1 at home to Crewe. And I got a sense again then after the Boxing Day that something was afoot. I got a phone call on, I think it was New Year's Day, really late at night. Come in Monday morning prepared. We've got a major announcement to make. And I was briefed that we were looking to sign Ched Evans. And that was the first I'd heard of it. So I woke up on the Sunday morning, and sure enough, on the radio it was, I think, Radio 5, Radio 2, League One club to sign Ched Evans. It didn't take 5 minutes before somebody found out that it was Oldham, and the phone started ringing off the hook. And that was on a Sunday. And nothing, things very rarely happen on a Sunday, but that whole day was spent fending off media, speculation, what's going on, to such that we'd lost control of the situation. In football, you need two things: you need control and you need time, and we had neither on it. And by the time I got to the club first thing Monday morning, the national press were parked outside waiting, and basically harangued us all week, and didn't leave until we announced, I think on the Thursday, that we weren't proceeding with the signing. It was a difficult time for everybody. I mean, I would say I never met Ched Evans. I've never met Ched Evans. I was given all the information around his case. I could see the positives of signing somebody like Ched Evans. I could see the negatives. We just never really got anywhere close to getting it over the line. But I think that was purely because others might think differently. I think it was because we were never in control of the situation, ever, and we couldn't get control. Once it had gone, once we'd lost control of the situation, we couldn't get it back. And the rest of the week was spent firefighting. It didn't help that Simon was in America and out of the way, and the staff just felt that they'd been left exposed and thrown to the wolves. And I felt a bit like that too. You just had to get on with it. You just had to roll your sleeves up and deal with it. You couldn't walk away. You just had to roll your sleeves up, work hard. And I remember, it wasn't funny at the time, but it is looking back. The media wanting a statement of some description one evening, banging on the ticket office windows. And it was difficult. The staff couldn't leave without being harangued. It wasn't their fault. We just couldn't manage the situation. I had no idea how to manage it. No idea how to manage that situation to the best, to make sure that the club was protected, the staff were protected, and we were all protected regardless of the outcome. And I went to the front door and I said, look, I can bring 4 of you in. I'll take in the nationals. I'll take BBC, ITV, Sky, somebody else, and of course the Daily Mail. Well, what about us? And there's nothing you could do. So I woke up the next morning with a piece in the Daily Mail, and I think it was just a destruction piece on the club. I think they'd linked sponsors who were in favour of signing Ched Evans and sponsors who were against, and put them in a pigeonhole. Sponsors were getting pelters from all over the place on email. I don't think Twitter was a thing then, and perhaps as well it wasn't. I think it would have been very difficult. It was a difficult time, But in the end, we didn't sign him. Looking back, it was probably the right decision. Whether we could have, I don't think we could have done in the end. I don't think we could have got it done. I think something somewhere would have prevented us from getting it done. Simon not being in the UK was instrumental. I think if he'd have been around and taken a lead, things might have been different. But it was very difficult. Very difficult. It's hard to describe when you're not involved. When you're not at the centre of the storm, if you like. It was difficult. That was the hardest. One of the 2 hardest things that I did it when I was at Oldham in my career. That was something else that we might touch on towards the end. But that was tough. I didn't have it. We couldn't handle it properly. No qualms in saying it. We couldn't cope. We didn't have the resource. We didn't have the capability. When you're dealing with Dan Rowan and Steve Scott, wanting information, wanting to know what it's like. I mean, I've spoken to them both since. I've dealt with them both since. It's easy, but when you're in the maelstrom of a crisis, it's very difficult, and we didn't have the skill sets to deal with it.
And it wasn't that long after all that happened that Lee Johnson left.
No, and I think it was the start. I think it wasn't. It was the beginning of the end for Lee's relationship with the club. But I think it was more to do with Simon's relationship with the club than Lee's. I think Simon, I think he was torn. I think he wanted to sign Ched Evans, but on the other hand, he knew what the consequences of signing could be, and in terms of the sponsorship and potential revenue that we could potentially miss out on. So it was a catch-22 for him. But I think it just took a bit of whatever mojo he had left for the club. I think he took it out of him, and that relationship with Lee when he wasn't around was always. became a little bit more tricky. And I think when the call from Barnsley came, I remember taking the call from Ben Mansford, who was chief executive at Barnsley at the time. I was surprised, really, because we were doing okay, but Lee was still a young manager, and you don't know what goes on behind the scenes. You've no idea who speaks to what, who tells you what. They might tell you 3 or 4 years later, do you remember that time? Well, I did this or I did that. But I have no real clue as to the real detail of it. But I just remember when Lee was given permission to speak to Barnsley, and I was shocked, I have to say. I'm disappointed. And it was the end obviously for Lee. We played Leyton Orient and got beat 3-0, and Lee was leaving. And I don't think Simon had again, he can speak for himself. It's only my opinion. But I think he lost his mojo completely once Lee gone. And it became a battle. And I think for me, I could see that, and it became a battle for me too. And it was a question of when, not if, after that. For me, to leave the South. Lee left. And the rest of that season, I think Dean Holden was in charge. Dean's another great guy. Again, he just had a bit of disappointment with Bristol City. But again, as a young manager, if he'd had somebody alongside him, a senior figurehead, somebody who knew the game, knew the level, just to take all that pressure off, give him time to do his job and to do his best, it may have been different for Dean. I like Dean a lot. I mean, he's got a lot to offer as a coach and a manager. One thing was with Dean, when he was interviewed, I missed the interview with Dean. I was at the EFL meeting. Of course, I knew Dean, I knew what he could offer, but apparently he was absolutely exceptional in interview, and I missed it. And it's no secret that obviously Darren Kelly got the job in the end, which was a mistake.
Yes, Darren Kelly is
was a mistake, and I think with everything that you do, and it's all doom. It seems doom and gloom. This is not, like I said before, not a great deal of fun. There were moments, cup games, big games, derby games. It wasn't a great deal. We had some fun behind the scenes, but it was never. It was always we always worked hard, and it was always difficult, and there were always problems. And in the end, those problems build up and build up and build up, and eventually take the toll on individuals and the club. To the extent where I think the club is still suffering from all the mistakes, because people take those decisions with the best intention, and with the interests of generally with the interest of the club at heart, or what they think is best for the club. But the decision like Darren Kelly, I mean, we quickly realised that was a mistake. And Darren, he'll have a good coaching career. He's a good coach. He's a good lad, a really good lad. But he was responsible. Well, he wasn't responsible. I was responsible, and the board were responsible for the other moment. And I thought, I can't do this anymore, because we had the police round at our house when we appointed Darren, because everybody thought he was a Republican, an Irish Republican. He wasn't. He's just a nice guy. Just happens to be an Irish Catholic. He's a nice guy. Again, one of the nicest guys you could wish to meet. Just for me, turned out not to be very good at the level we were at the time as a football manager.
Again, so obviously I have relationships with players that were at the club at the time, and a lot of them did say that actually, in terms of his coaching, he was all right. He was a good coach, but
he's a very good coach. He's a very good coach, and I think
real side probably wasn't ready. It wasn't the right appointment.
No, he wasn't. He wasn't ready. He wasn't right, and it wasn't. We all got. I think. There was a potential for Dean and Darren to do a joint manager's role, which may have worked, might not have done. Might have been interesting to see how it came out. But Darren was a good coach, qualified up to the hilt, But it's not just about coach. At the level we're at, you have to be able to manage players, do the difficult side of the business, and he wasn't capable of doing it. And we realised that pretty quickly. I think actually that the first few games, that was probably the Colchester away. This was something I looked at this morning. I tried to remember which was the worst game that I ever saw, that I can ever remember. And we drew 0-0 at Colchester, and I don't think either side had a shot, never mind a shot on target in the whole 90 minutes. It were a Tuesday night. It were a horrible game. and that was the worst game. And yet we drew. We won. We beat Fleetwood. I think we drew Walsall. We beat Bury. Or I think we beat Bury. We did beat Bury. I think we beat them 1-0, or at least drew with Bury. And we were sort of unbeaten. And then we played Peterborough. And the week before we played Peterborough, we had a board meeting, and Simon asked Darren about Peterborough and what they were, what his plans were for Peterborough. And he wasn't really 100% convincing. He certainly didn't convince us that he had any plans for what Peterborough were going to do. And sure enough, the beat was 5-1, and the writing was on the wall. He had to go. A shame, because again, he's a good guy, but it was the wrong appointment. It was a mistake.
And by this point, I was on the outside looking in, and it sort of already seemed to me that his replacement was already lined up and had been signed by the club a matter of weeks earlier.
Well, I presume you mean David Dunn.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think by this stage, events had taken over, and whether Simon wanted Dunny to be manager or not, he wanted him to be part of around the club. We needed an experienced player. We need experienced players. We were struggling for players. It's very difficult to see where we were going to get who our best players were and how we were going to succeed. It was going to be a very difficult season, so we needed some experience. And yeah, I think Dunny was brought in potentially, if he'd wanted it. There was no indication that he actually wanted it, not to me anyway, to be a potential manager should things not work out, so that there was a succession plan in place. I always thought it's important to have a succession plan personally, as long as people aren't aware of it. But it was pretty obvious that that something along those lines had been planned. Only those that were involved would know for 100% certain whether that was the case. But by that stage, Dunny was untried. Again, young manager. If he'd have brought in a more experienced number two, he might have succeeded. He might have had more success. You look back and you think maybe, but it wasn't to be for him either. And then of course Shez came in and the Shez-erection was born.
And by that point, you mentioned earlier that perhaps after Lee left, that you were then looking at your own position and your own future.
Oh yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think it took its toll. I mean, those that know me would know better than anybody that it was a real struggle. I think we went to Sheffield United in the FA Cup and lost 1-0 under David Dunn. And I drove over the hills with my brother-in-law. Alfie were in the back of the car. I think one of my nephews was in the car, and I said, "I've had enough. I don't think I want to do this anymore." And my brother-in-law, I always have a go at him for it, and he always has to go back at me for it. He says, "But you never know what's around the corner. You never know what's next." And I looked at it. I thought, no, he's right. It would be churlish to give up, having gone through so much that previous season and got to this stage. Things have changed. There's a new manager in charge. Let's see where it takes you. The stand was being opened. I think we opened it against Sheffield United in the league, didn't we? That season. So there were green shoots. It was difficult, but there were green shoots. But it was firefighting a lot of the time. A lot of firefighting. No money. The usual story, but without anything to sort of like look forward to. But Shez, it's like under Shez, you roll your sleeves up, you get on with it. It takes no prisoners. It's very easy to manage as a chief executive. It's very straightforward. No messing about, and that's what you want. The ideal type of manager for a chief executive. You know where you stand. You know what he wants, and you're more inclined to give it him because he does. So, and he did well. But then, of course, he got poached by Notts County at the end of the season. So again, just as you're sort of like maybe settling in, Notts County come along with an offer and he accepts it. Still don't know why he did. I have no idea why he accepted that offer. I think he was linked with Leeds on the evening of the awards dinner, the awards evening. Leeds were supposed to be. He was odds on for the Leeds job, and nothing came of that. But he ended up at Notts.
So what finally brought about the decision? One of the questions we had in was not so much as why you chose to leave, but why you chose to leave to drop to National League North. And that wasn't a question from me either. That was
no. Well, it came about it was quite a long process. I made a decision, and it was a conscious decision, that I was leaving, and it was just a question of I wanted to stay in football, I wanted a challenge, I wanted to be able to sort of like work for a club where I thought that had a little bit of resource that I could maybe utilize, and make a bit of a difference. And the file job was, to be honest, I can't remember where I came across it. I might have been talking to somebody else, and it was mentioned, would you be interested in giving him a ring? And I rang David, the chairman, down there, and he was on his yacht in Marbella, and he said, I'll have a chat with you when I come back from my break. So I did that, and that course of that summer was when we had no manager and no players. I think we had Carl Winchester, Brian Wilson, and that was it. Don't think we had. Those were the only two signed up, and we couldn't find a manager. Simon couldn't. He wanted the right type of manager. He tried Steve Evans. We thought we had a deal with Steve Evans to become the new manager. Steve slept on it and decided not to sign. And we ended up with Steve Robinson. Again, another very talented, in my opinion. A lot of fans won't agree because they only saw the 0-0s and the 0-1s and the 1-0s and the not the expansive open football that Oldham fans, I think, like, and what I like, really. But that summer was difficult for different reasons, in that we were first day of pre-season training, we had 2 players signed and a load of trialists, and we knew that there was going to be hard work. And Latics played Filed away in a friendly at Kellermer Park, and I went down that day. It was a lovely sunny day. Simon Corney were having trouble with some supporters, and he turned up, and he rang me after the game. We got beat 1-0, and he rang me after the game and said, we haven't got any players. I think Crofty were back. There was 1 or 2 others knocking around. We haven't got any players. What are we going to do? I said, well, we'll do what we can. So we put a squad together, which we did, and we started the season. Things didn't go well. I think the day I left, we were bottom of the league. I think it was 1 apiece against MK Dons, and we were bottom of the league. So the day I left, we were bottom of the league. We never went down while I was there, but I ended up bottom. And Shez again came back and rescued that season. So it was a process whereby I didn't see it as dropping down, really. I just saw it as a fresh start for myself. Potential was, it still is. Whatever everybody thinks of the owner and his methods, try and
probably best I don't comment on that part.
Whatever you think. And he's difficult. He's probably the hardest person you'll ever likely to come across in any walk of life to deal with. But I think once you understand, and once you get through the initial issues of understanding where he's coming from, you can work with him. It was just 2 years of incredibly difficult, hard work, but successful. I mean, I got a promotion under my belt, and a successful first season in the National League as well. Again, with an incredibly talented manager, Dave Challoner, who, again, he's doing well with Hartlepool at the moment. Another manager who should be managing for me in the Football League. I would have no hesitation in giving a job in the Football League if I was involved. After 19 years at Oldham, I left with a heavy heart, but it was the right time, and it should have been. I probably should have left 12 months early for my sanity, if nothing else.
So we'll now go on to some fairly quicker questions. We've got one more question that's been sent in, and Wayne Hurst, of course, many years as Chaddy the Owl. Wayne would like to know, were you ever victim to a Gordon Lawton wind-up? Because obviously Gordon, of course, famous for his
wind-ups, yeah. And I suppose in there as long as I was, and you quickly realise what Gordon was like. So there was no way he was ever going to wind you up, because he'd done it to other people and you knew what was coming. So the brilliant thing about Gordy was that he always gave you his opinion, whether you liked it or not, and he always gave you an honest opinion. And I always remember the day I took over as chief executive, and he wasn't one for putting an arm around you. He said, good luck, just remember one thing. And I thought, he's going to tell me a joke. And he actually turned around and said, just remember, first and foremost, it's a football club. And it sort of, that really resonated. You know, all the other stuff that goes on, the politics, the boardroom shenanigans, all that stuff. At the end of the day, it's a football club. And for a small-ish club, I say small, and it's not being patronising or disrespectful, compared to the big beasts and everything, Oldham, small community club, it is a football club first and foremost. And if you start off with that, the forefront of your mind as part of your plan, you've got a chance. And I tried to do my bit, always ensuring that the football came first, so that game went on the Sunday. I got upset if I woke up on a Saturday morning and it was frosty outside. I was ringing. You know, we stayed up with Lee Williams one night under the covers, making sure that the pitch wasn't frosted, it's defrosted. You know, it was a football club first and foremost. 3 o'clock Saturday, 7:45 on a Tuesday. You kicked off. It was football, and Gordon was the same. And I think people at the club should always remember that first and foremost. It's not their own fiefdom, or it's not for them. It's a football club for the fans, and that's how it should be. So, you know, of course, Gordon would wind you up, but you know, deep down, he was the heart and soul of the club, I felt, and it was a sad loss when he passed away.
Indeed. Right, I'm going to move on to some. I don't want you to think too much about these. Just fire the answers out.
Right, okay.
You get them. Right. When you were chief exec, many people every day would knock on your office door. Who did you always dread and know that you were going to get problems with? Was there any players that you thought, oh, not again?
Crofty was bad because you knew he was going to keep you for about an hour and a half before you could get anything done. To be honest with you, I mentioned Lee Williams before. You knew if the groundsman was coming, there's a problem. So it was those type of people that come in. If you knew somebody came to you only if there was a problem, that they couldn't solve themselves. So you knew that there was going to be a difficult conversation. I quite enjoyed when people came to the door to clear, you know, brought a cake or something like that.
Okay. You don't have to name players on this one. Weirdest clause you've ever seen in a contract?
Oh, crumbs. Well, they were, yeah, right. There's two that didn't get put in that we wanted to put in. Crofty again was one. We wanted to put in something whereby we could regulate his body mass, I think is the right phrase. So we tried to put something through, but the PFA weren't having any of it. The other one was Johnson Clark Harris, another crackpot of an individual, but a lovely lad, heart of gold. But Lee brought him in, and Lee Johnson, and he insisted that Johnson stayed within like 2 minutes of the club and had regular meals and all that. So we said, can we put that in his contract? And his agent wasn't having any of that. But I think Lee spent most of the time babysitting him anyway when he was at the club. So we found a way around it. But those two, yeah, most of the time, it was very difficult to put something strange in contracts because contracts are very strictly regulated. You can't put, you know, want to put a funny clause in here and there, you know, a bonus or something like that, which you can put in. But most of it is just thrown away because the PFA and the PFNCC, the PFA, the Football League, the FA just don't allow it. So it has to be very strict.
Okay.
Plenty of contract clauses I like to have put in, but anyway.
Next up, and again, you can protect the innocent or indeed the guilty in this. Strangest player issue you've ever dealt with?
Oh, well, yeah. I remember waking up on a Sunday morning. I think you might have been responsible for ruining my Sunday morning, and driving to one of Alfie's football matches. I was coaching Alfie's team at the time, and I think it was, I got a text from you, have you seen the News of the World? And I said no, and you sent me the link. It was Christian Montano who was on the front page of the News of the World. Again, that was incredibly difficult. I was trying to coach an under-7s football team, and I got the National Crime Agency on the telephone. So that was difficult. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Of all the characters you've been with, the loosest cannon that you've come across in the football?
There's a few. I mean, again, they had hearts. The hearts were in the right place. Players like George Green, Craig Davis, the first time round, Darren Sheridan. I mean, Darren Sheridan was an absolute Fruit Loop. I mean, what a character. I mean, he would come in, he would just cheer everybody up, but you never knew what you were going to get next from Darren. People like that. Yeah. Those that knew them knew that their hearts were in the right place, but they were hard work, difficult to deal with.
Okay. Two separate ones. The best player from your 19 years at the club and your favourite player from your 19 years.
My favourite was David Ayres. He might also be the best, actually. Although Shez and Wellens, quality-wise, I got to mention Steve Gerrard when he came on for half an hour for Liverpool. I actually just stopped and watched him for a good 15 minutes, just him and his movement and his control of the game. I've never seen anybody dominate a game like that, and a losing cause as well. But Shez, Paul Murray, talented. I like the talented players. Some of the younger lads, some of the Neil Kilkennys, Ryan Bertrand, who've gone on to better things than playing at Oldham. And again, no disrespect for their careers. Chris Taylor. I enjoyed watching Chris because he's an Oldham boy, and you like that type of player. Players who the fans relate to. You come out. There's a lad at the moment that Oldham have got, Dylan Bahambola. He's very raw, but he's definitely got something about him. If somebody can get hold of him, there's a proper footballer in there, a proper footballer. I mean, it's been a couple of years since I've seen anybody with that ability putting the blue shirt on. That's for sure. Yeah, I like him.
And of all the managers you dealt with, the favourite manager to deal with?
No, favourite's not. It's difficult to say favourite. Ian Dowie was the best man manager. Lee Johnson was the best coach. They all had something about them. All of them, all of them had a quality. They had to have had, otherwise they wouldn't have got the job in the first place. They wouldn't be managers. But I enjoy and how Shez managed to galvanise. Shez is funny because you'd never know that he was a football manager. He's just like one of the lads off the street, and yet he's such ability as a player, and his ability to get the best out of what on the face of it looks like an ordinary group of League One footballers, and get them to perform well enough to get themselves over the line twice to survive. And when he had good players like Wellens and Chris Porter and that side in the playoffs, almost dragging Oldham to promotion, he'd be well up on the list. And I also Tony Philliskirk could have been a decent manager if he'd have wanted to be. I mean, whenever he took over, he's again a really good coach, and it's no coincidence that when Dowie had that team, that Tony was his number two. That were a good combination. That were a good probably the best combination that I work with, those two.
And I've got one final question for you. Might be a difficult one to answer, but we'll go with it anyway. Your best overall memory, if you had to single one thing out from your time at the club?
Well, it would be that Nottingham Forest game. I think the relief, that would be my best game. I thought about this morning. I just checked back and just made sure that the facts about that. But that performance in the second half, that was my abiding memory. The Liverpool game and the Everton game in the cup, to me, were brilliant days for the fans, for the staff, for the players, for everybody. But that Nottingham Forest game, that 45 minutes, it's been spells where we've played some really good football against ordinary teams. That Nottingham Forest team was a good side, a good side, and I thought we, from somewhere, from nowhere, and I'll never know where it came from, never. we managed to pull that round. That was my best game, without a shadow of a doubt.
Excellent. Well, that seems like a pretty good place to leave it. So thank you very much for taking the time to go back over the last 19 years or so.
I've quite enjoyed it, actually. I hope people have enjoyed listening.
Thank you very much to Neil Joy for taking the time to join us today and look back on his 19 years at Latics. Some fantastic memories and stories from Neil's time with the club. A big thank you to you all for watching or listening. It's very much appreciated. A big thank you also to our sponsors once again, AC Tyres, NFL Weekends and Eden Creative UK, and also to Luke for editing and putting all this together. I imagine the last hour and a half probably got his hands full. Next week, we will be bringing you our interview and podcast with former Latics defender and guy who went on to play for England, James Tarkowski. We're delighted to be joined by Tarky next week. Looking forward to that one. Should you have any suggestions for any future guests that you'd like to see, or any questions for people that we've got booked in, then we are at the Chaddy Enders on Twitter and at the Chaddy Enders podcast on Facebook. Please drop us a message. I've been David Broadbent. Thank you very much for tuning in and have a fantastic week. Cheers.